Seraphine Vale was the kind of person who always sat at the edge of the room, not because she was shy, and not because she was afraid. She simply had learned, over many years, that the middle of the room was not made for her. She was 23 years old, quiet in the way that still water is quiet, and she lived in a small apartment above a flower shop in a little town called Crescent Hollow, tucked deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. She worked at the town library 5 days a week, sorting books, fixing catalog cards, and keeping the reading room in perfect order. She loved the library. It never asked her to be louder, or brighter, or more interesting than she already was. The books never looked through her the way people sometimes did. She had found a life inside those walls that felt honest and clean, even if it was small. What most people in Crescent Hollow did not fully understand was that their town was not entirely ordinary. The people who lived there belonged to a world that existed quietly underneath the world that everyone else could see. They were werewolves, a pack known as the Crescent Hollow Wolves, and their society had its own rules, its own ranks, and its own way of deciding who mattered and who did not. In that world, Seraphine Vale did not rank very high. She had no known bloodline of importance, no special ability, no place at the main table. She was simply there, like background noise, like furniture that everyone uses, but nobody notices. She had one true friend. Her name was Mira Holt, a warm and cheerful young woman who worked as a healer at the Pack Clinic. Mira was the kind of person who noticed things, small things, things other people missed. She had noticed, for example, that every full moon, Seraphine's eyes changed color. They became silver, clear and bright like polished moonstone. Seraphine always wore contact lenses to hide it. She had been hiding it since she was old enough to understand that being different in the wrong way was dangerous. On the first Monday of October, the entire pack began buzzing with news. Alpha King Kale Dawnmere was coming to Crescent Hollow. He was not just a pack alpha. He was the ruler of all 7 werewolf packs across North America, the rarest of titles, given only once in a generation. He was 27 years old, powerful in a way that went beyond size or strength, and he was known for being precise, demanding, and deeply private. He did not visit packs often. When he did, it meant something. Seraphine was assigned to help prepare the welcome documents for his arrival. It was a clerical task that no one else wanted. She did not mind. She organized the papers neatly, set up the signing table, and told herself she would stay in the background, do her work, and go home. The night before his arrival, she had a dream. She was standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, and a silver wolf appeared from the trees and walked toward her. It stopped very close and looked at her with eyes that she somehow recognized, even though she had never seen them before. When it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was not a howl. It was more like a bell, one single, clear note that went through her chest like a key turning in a lock. She woke up with tears on her face and had no idea why. Kale arrived the next afternoon. Seraphine watched from the doorway of the pack hall as his convoy pulled in. He stepped out into the pale October light and stood very still for a moment, scanning the crowd. She told herself she was only looking because everyone was looking. But then, for just a second, his gaze crossed hers. It was quick. It was nothing. He moved on without stopping, without expression, without any sign that he had seen anything at all. She turned back inside and got to work. The formal pack dinner that evening was held in the main hall. Long tables, candles, polished wood, and the smell of warm food and nerves. Seraphine was assigned to assist the service staff, another task for the lower-ranked members of the pack. She carried document folios to the head table, refilled water, and moved quietly between the guests. She was walking to the head table with a stack of papers when her foot caught the leg of a chair. The folio slipped. Pages flew across the floor and slid in every direction. She dropped to her knees immediately, gathering them up, trying to be as invisible as possible while doing it. One page slid all the way to the foot of the Alpha King's chair. She reached for it. So did he. Their hands touched at the same moment. The world did not stop, but something inside her shifted so sharply it nearly took her breath away. It was like standing in a quiet room when a sound suddenly fills it. Something large and warm and undeniable, pressing against the inside of her chest. She looked up at him without meaning to. He was already looking at her. His beta, a steady young man named Lorne who sat just beside him, inhaled slowly. His eyes flickered between the two of them. Then Kale took his hand away. He set the page on the edge of the table, away from her, without giving it back directly. And he said, very quietly, in a voice that only she could hear, "You may go." It was not a command to leave the room. It was a dismissal. She understood it completely, not just the words, but everything behind them. He had felt what she felt, and he had turned it away. She stood. She gathered her papers. She walked to the back of the hall at a steady, even pace. She did not rush. She did not look at anyone. She pushed open the side door and stepped out into the cold October night. Behind the hall, where the light from the windows did not quite reach, she pressed her back against the stone wall. She breathed in. She breathed out. She did not cry. She stood there for exactly 1 minute, feeling the cold air on her face, and then she straightened her coat, picked up her bag, and walked home. 3 days passed. Kale remained in Crescent Hollow for the formal review. Seraphine rearranged her entire routine to avoid every place he might be. She took different routes to work. She ate lunch at her desk. She kept her head down and her contact lenses in, and told herself it did not matter. On the morning of the 4th day, Mira came to her apartment and found her packing a bag. It was a single bag, small and practical. Seraphine was folding a sweater into it with the same careful, unhurried hands she used to organize the library shelves. She told Mira she was going to stay with a cousin in Oregon for a while, a few weeks, maybe a little longer. She needed some time away. Mira asked, gently, if this was about the Alpha King. Seraphine placed the sweater into the bag and smoothed it flat. She said, "I felt something at the dinner. He felt it too, and then he told me to go. That is the whole story, Mira. Some stories are that short." Mira argued. She said Seraphine should stay, should wait, should give it more time. Seraphine listened to all of it. Then she zipped the bag closed, left a short note for her pack Alpha, and put on her coat. She said goodbye to Mira at the door. She walked to the bus station in the rain. She bought her ticket, found a window seat, and watched Crescent Hollow disappear behind the trees as the bus pulled away. She put her headphones in. She closed her eyes. She had spent her entire life in spaces that did not fully want her. She was not going to fight for a place in one more. 2 hours after the bus left, something happened back in Crescent Hollow that changed everything. Elder Kala, the oldest living member of the pack, arrived at the main hall and asked to speak privately with the Alpha King. She was a small, very old woman, with white hair and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. When she walked into the room, Kale's Beta Lorne quietly excused himself. Kale waited. She placed a document on the table between them. It was very old, the paper almost gold with age, and at the top was a seal that Kale had only ever seen in history books. He went still when he recognized it. It was the Lunar Covenant crest, a symbol from the time of the first packs, before the 7 great bloodlines had separated, before the world had grown modern and complicated and careful. Kala told him what only a handful of people in the world still knew. The Sacred Moon bloodline, a bloodline that most believed had been destroyed 60 years ago, had not been destroyed. The last heir had been hidden. As an infant, she had been smuggled into Crescent Hollow under a false name and a false history, raised deliberately in ordinary life to keep her safe from those who would have harmed her for what she carried in her blood. Kala slid a photograph across the table. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing in a garden with her eyes wide open. Silver eyes, unmistakable even in a photograph that had faded with time. Kale looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he said, "Where is she now?" Kala said, "She left this morning. On the bus to Oregon. I think you already know why." The room was completely silent. Kale was on the road within the hour. He did not bring a convoy. He brought Lorne and one other, and they drove fast through the wet October forest in a single vehicle. On the way, Lorne told him everything the council law required. The Sacred Moon heir could not be refused by any Alpha, including the king. A public rejection at a formal gathering was a serious violation. There would be consequences before the High Council. And the bond between them, the fated connection the moon goddess placed between a moon heir and her chosen mate, did not break when it was rejected. It reversed. She would stop feeling it. He would feel it for both of them, forever, unless she chose to restore it. There was one more detail. The window for her to choose was 72 hours from the moment of the rejection. After that, the reversal was permanent. She would be free, he would not. He had less than 60 hours left. He found the bus at a rest stop in a small coastal town in Oregon. He parked and walked across the wet parking lot alone. He stood near the entrance of the rest stop and waited. Seraphine stepped off the bus to stretch her legs. She looked up and saw him standing there, alone. No guards, no formal coat, just a man in the rain looking at her. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was very hard to read. Then she said, quietly and clearly, "No," and she turned and walked back onto the bus. He bought a ticket at the small window inside the rest stop. He boarded the bus. He found the empty seat beside her and sat down. She kept her eyes on the window. He did not start with the law. He did not start with the council, or the covenant, or the bond. He said, "You deserve to know who you are, regardless of what you decide about anything else." And he told her, all of it. The bloodline, the hidden history, the photograph Kala had shown him, the truth of where she had come from, and why she had been raised without knowing it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the Oregon forest rolled past in the gray afternoon light. Finally, she said, "You felt it at the dinner." He said yes. She said, "And you sent me away." He said yes. She turned from the window and looked at him directly. "Was it because you did not want me, or because you were afraid of what wanting me would mean?" He had no answer that was not also a confession. She accepted his silence. She said, "I am not going back to be collected. Not by duty, not by old laws, not by anything I did not choose." She said it without anger. She said it the way a person states a fact they have known for a long time and are simply now speaking out loud. He said he was not asking her to go back for any of those reasons. He said he was asking only to stay beside her, not as a king with a legal obligation, but as someone who had behaved badly and knew it, and who wanted, if she would allow it, to be honest with her. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached over and moved her bag off the seat beside her, making more room. They spent 3 days in the coastal town where the bus ended. It was a quiet place with fog in the mornings, and salt air, and a small diner that made very good coffee. His guards kept a polite distance at the edge of things. He did not invoke his title once. They talked. They disagreed. They sat in silence at the diner counter and watched the rain. She showed him her eyes, removed the contact lenses for the first time in front of another person, and let him see the silver. He went very still when he saw it, and something in his face changed in a way that was not authority or duty. It was something much quieter than that. She told him about her life, the years of being overlooked, the birthdays that passed without notice, the way she had built an entire interior world because the exterior one kept not having space for her. He listened to all of it without trying to fix it or explain it away. He told her about his sister, a younger girl lost in a pack war when Kale was 19. He had never told anyone. The words came out slowly, like something that had been locked away for a very long time and was only now finding air. She did not try to comfort him. She just listened. That was enough. On the third night, the 72-hour window closed quietly, with no ceremony. Whatever happened between them now was not fate, or law, or ancient covenant. It was only choice. He did not tell her the window had passed, but she saw something change in the way he looked at her, a shift from something urgent into something much steadier and more certain. She noted it without saying anything. In the morning, she said, "You could have led with the law and the prophecy and the political consequences. You did not." He said, "I know." She said nothing more, but she poured his coffee without being asked. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. She decided to return. Not because she was told to, not because ancient law required her presence. She returned because she had a right to know the history she had been kept from, and she intended to claim that right on her own terms. She told Kale this clearly before they left Oregon. She said she was going to speak with Elder Kala, meet her Uncle Dorian, a high-ranking wolf who, she had now learned, was her mother's brother and had been the one to hide her as an infant, and learn everything about the bloodline she carried. She said this had nothing to do with him. He agreed with no argument. He arranged for her to travel safely. He arranged for her to enter the High Council chambers under her own bloodline title, not escorted by his authority. The distinction mattered to her. He made sure of it. Back in the pack world, the news of her existence had spread. Some people were reverent, some were unsettled. Power balances shifted when a moon heir emerged. It was a complicated thing, and not everyone was comfortable with complicated things. One woman approached her directly, Thessaly Crow, elegant and composed, who had a long-standing political arrangement with Kale that had always been understood as something more than business. She stopped Seraphine in a corridor and looked at her for a long moment. Seraphine met her eyes calmly. She said, "I have no argument with you. The king's decisions are his own. My existence has nothing to do with them." Then she walked on. That exchange made its way through the pack world very quickly. It was not what anyone expected from a woman who had spent her whole life being invisible. The respect it earned was quiet and immediate and real. Kale stood before the High Council shortly after. 7 elders, 7 bloodlines, 1 formal chamber. He was there to answer for the rejection. He did not make excuses. He said, "I was wrong. I acted from fear, and I dressed that fear up as authority, which made it worse. The moon heir left with more dignity than I deserved. Whatever the council decides is appropriate, I will answer it." The room was very quiet. Alpha Kings did not often speak to the council in that way. Then Elder Kala informed the council that Seraphine had submitted her own written statement. The surprise in the room was visible. Kala read it aloud. Seraphine's statement said that she was not calling for any action against the Alpha King. She said the interpack tensions the Covenant existed to address were too important for the council to spend its energy on punishment. She said she had not been raised in this world and had no political loyalty to its structures, and that what she could see clearly from the outside was that the problems in front of them required focus, not ceremony. She asked the council to let the matter rest and get to work. The council voted. Kale kept his title. He was formally required to make public amends to the moon heir at the next full moon gathering. He accepted without hesitation. The full moon gathering was the largest cross-pack assembly in 30 years. Every major pack had sent representatives. The air was cold and clear, the moon enormous above the trees, and hundreds of wolves stood in the wide ceremonial clearing at the edge of the forest. Seraphine walked in without escort. She wore no special clothing or symbol of rank. Her silver eyes were uncovered and open in the moonlight. She moved through the crowd the way she had always moved, quietly, without taking up more space than she needed. But there was something different about her now. The quietness was a choice. It no longer looked like invisibility. It looked like certainty. Kale met her in the center of the circle. In front of every alpha, beta, and elder who had come from across the continent. He did not make a formal speech. He spoke to her, not to the crowd. He said, "You walked into a room and I sent you away because I was afraid of what it meant to need someone. I am sorry, not as a king making a required apology, but as the person who had the worst possible response to something real, and has spent weeks trying to become someone worth a second chance. I have no right to expect." No one in the crowd made a sound. They all understood, without being told, that this was not for them. Seraphine looked at him steadily. Then she said, "I walked away because I have spent my whole life being made small by spaces that did not want me, and I refuse to do it one more time. I am not interested in being chosen by obligation, or by old laws, or by anything I did not earn. So I want you to tell me, not the council, not the bond, not the history books. You, what do you want?" He looked at her. He said, "You. Without the title, without the covenant, without the political purpose. You, specifically, as the person you are, if you will have me." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the people watching held their breath. Then she said, "Ask me again in 6 months, when we have built something worth saying yes to." It was not a yes, but the way she said it, and the way she looked at him when she said it, made it clear to everyone standing in that cold moonlit clearing exactly what the answer would be. 6 months passed. Seraphine had established herself in a neutral city called Ashvale, a place that had belonged to no single pack for centuries, and therefore, by ancient covenant right, belonged to the moon heir bloodline. She had opened a center there, part archive, part safe space, part community hall, for wolves who had no pack placement and needed somewhere to belong. She had built it herself, from an empty building with old floors and tall windows, with help from Mira, who had followed her gladly, and from a slowly growing number of people who were drawn to what she was making. She and her Uncle Dorian spoke on the phone twice a week. It was still complicated between them, still tender and careful, and full of things that had not yet been said. But it was real, and it was growing, and she valued it. She and Cale had spent the 6 months learning each other honestly, dinners that ran long into the evening, arguments about small things and large things, hours of comfortable silence. He had ended his arrangement with Thessaly not because the law required it, but because it had already been over in truth for a long time, and continuing it was unkind. He said this to Seraphine without being asked. She appreciated that. On the night of the winter solstice, exactly 6 months after the full moon gathering, he arrived at the center in Ashvale, alone, no guards. He knocked on the front door like an ordinary person. She opened it. He stood in the cold evening light with his hands in his coat pockets, and he said, 6 months. She said, I know. He said, so? She stepped back from the door and opened it wider. He walked inside. She closed the door behind him against the cold. There was no ceremony, no grand moment, no words that would look important written down, just a room with warm light, and 2 people who had taken the long way around to standing in the same place at the same time, and who had decided, quietly and without any audience at all, to stay.